Hello everyone, I am Omnicorum, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a Skrillex Barely Alive style growl out of only Ableton stock effects. This is what it's going to sound like. Just like that. Now, let's see how it's done.
Colorblind.
Alright, I have here an empty MIDI track just called Skrill Growl, and we are going to put an instrument rack on it. That's step one, and then press this button here to display your 8 macros. These are what we're going to use to craft our sound, and so that when you save it, you can reload it and create variations on the sound really easily in the future. Okay, so we're going to need an instrument to actually produce the sound, and this, along with Corpus, are the only Suite exclusive instruments. The rest are all standard, and I'll actually show you an alternative to Corpus if you don't have that. If you don't have Suite in general and you need Synthesizer, literally all the synthesizer we're going to be producing is a saw wave, and the only thing about Wavetable, which is the instrument we're using, is that you can morph between a square and a saw, but again, that's optional, it's not necessary. All you need is a synthesizer that can make a nice clean saw wave. Okay, now that we have our wavetable here, there's a few settings that we're going to be changing to get the effect we want. First, we're going to set the wavetable to the saw wave. In Wavetable, that just so happens to be 67%, because it's like 2/3 of the wave down. Next, you're going to be changing this envelope here so that it stays at a consistent pitch, and there's basically no release. You're going to set it to mono mode so that you can't have multiple notes playing at once, and I'd like the glide around 1 second, maybe just under. If you go into the MIDI tab, double click on this amp velocity thing to make sure that if you're using a MIDI keyboard, it's not going to change the volume of the sound as you're trying to make the sound. That's what we have so far. Let's get into the effects, where the sound will truly be shaped. Next thing you're going to want to do is grab an auto filter. Set it to bandpass mode and make sure it's on 24 decibels per octave. This frequency is the main knob we're going to be using to get the wobble. You can already kind of hear it now. It's really quiet right now, but you can still already hear it. Set the resonance so that this peak is just popping over the midline, and let's go to the next step. Now the next part is the corpus. Now, I have a special preset here called Bass Crunch. You can look at it right here and copy the settings. But what this is going to end up doing is giving it that nice, like, high-end stuff in the final sound. You can't really hear it now. It only sounds like it's just made it a little wider, but it will make a big difference. If you want to know an alternative to that, you can actually use the frequency shifter. If you set the dry wet to be pretty low, and you can just mess with these LFO, amount, rate, and phase, and that will actually give you a similar effect. A different sounding effect, but the effect will be similar. So if you don't have Corpus, you can use that. I'm just going to delete it for now. Now that you've copied all these bass crunch settings, we are going to be putting in the OTTs. If you don't know what OTT is, it's this. This is a stock preset of Ableton's multiband compressor. You don't have to know what that means. I can make a video on it in the future if you want to know. But all you have to know is that it makes a sound a lot more full, and it can bring out some serious high end if it doesn't already have that. I'm going to be setting the output here to 7 decibels, not 70. There we go, 7 decibels, and this is how it sounds now. You can start to hear that bass crunch coming into effect. Now you'll really be able to hear it when we duplicate it and duplicate it again. Now this is what it sounds like. Yeah, that's pretty gnarly. The rest of the effects are really just to thicken it up. If you have a fat rack you like, you can use that. I really like the fat rack that was made by Crow. He made a video on it, free download. It's also all Ableton stock plugins, so you don't need to worry about that. If you want to know what the plugins are, there are these right here. Yeah, it's just a fat rack making it sound a bit fatter. Next, we're going to add an EQ8. This is my default EQ8 setting. It's pretty simple. There's just a steep, low cut right here. I like to tune it to C0, just because that's generally the lowest note you're going to be playing with this. I like to tune it there, and then I like to take this one, put it just a little bit of a boost for the sub, take this one and give it a tiny little cut around 100 to 200 hertz here, and then use the rest to kind of create a formant looking filter thing by having two peaks here and a notch in between, but not a full notch, just like a little trough, and then setting number 7 to a high shelf and just giving it a bit, just the tiniest bit of a boost, just like that. And that's going to be the EQ curve we use. The last effect I'm going to be putting on is this Omnicorum clipper rack that I made. It has 2 parameters, punch and restore. It's made up of a glue compressor and 2 utilities. The punch turns up the makeup gain on the glue compressor, which is set to soft clipping mode, and then it also turns down the gain of the first utility. What this essentially means is that it's creating, it's making the sound the same volume, but it's soft clipping it and turning the volume down. It's perceived to be the same volume, but the actual volume is lower, which gives you more headroom, and it just makes better. Restore just turns up its second utility, so if you want it fully maxed out, you can just push that back to 0 decibels. I found that results work best when punch is set to 40 and restore is set to around 5.8 decibels-ish. Now that we have that done, this is what it sounds like. Pretty darn thick. The last thing we're going to be doing is setting up some macros. You can set these macros up to whatever you want. I'm just going to show you what I have them mapped to on mine. This manual wob knob sets the auto filter frequency position here. It goes from 40 hertz all the way up to 1250 hertz or 1.25 kilohertz. I just found that those values work best. This saw to square knob changes the wavetable position of the wavetable. It starts, like I said, at the square and ends at 100% at the saw, or at the square. It just gives it a different sound. This is saw, this is square. And you can mix between the two, which is nice. High details here controls the low pass curve of the wavetable. This is literally just a low pass. You'd think, why, that's a little ridiculous. You would think cutting it all the way at the bottom would sound awful, but it doesn't. It actually sounds really cool. Just essentially cuts off some of the higher details, and you can add those back in. Just makes for interesting textures. Port time here changes the glide from the wavetable. It goes from 90 milliseconds up to 2.5 seconds if you really want some long, really long stuff like that. This bass crunch knob here just changes the dry wet of the corpus here. If you're using the frequency shifter, again, it's the same thing, just change the dry wet. This one goes from 0% to 13%, but you just have to experiment with whatever sounds good if you're using the frequency shifter. This LFO amount and LFO sync rate knobs are kind of interesting. These are also on the auto filter. LFO amount controls the LFO amount of the auto filter. If you turn that up, you can see it goes, I just set it up to 20 instead of the full 30. 30 is a little ridiculous, it doesn't really sound good. And then LFO sync rate is just the rate of the LFO. I set it to go from 8th note at minimum to a whole note at maximum. I actually really like the sound of quarter note, but you can just hear what that sounds like. Just like that. I like to keep that down. I like to be able to do it manually with the... And then this fat knob here controls quite a few things. First, it controls the fat knob on Crow's fat rack. It goes from, 0 to 127. It also controls power on and off, but that goes from 63 to 127. This power on off, it only goes off if it's below 64. So what this does is it turns it off if it's at 0. If it's anything higher, it's going to be on. You can see that, and then the rest of it is just essentially this fat knob. It also controls the Omnicorum clipper rack, where it goes from 0 up to that 40 and pushes the restore from the 0 decibels to the 5.85 that I mentioned earlier. And so you can go from a not thick sound to a very thick sound as much as you want. Once you have all these macros mapped out, you don't have to do these exact things. You can modulate any of these parameters. I just like these. I find them really helpful. But once you have that, you can click this save button, name it whatever you want, and then drag it onto any MIDI track. All you have to do, create a new MIDI track, call it something, doesn't really matter, you don't even have to call it anything. Drag Omnicorum Skrill Growl onto it, and there you go. It's right there, saved at whatever point you had it last. And with that, you have made a Skrillex Barely Alive style growl using only Ableton stock effects. And if you're one of those people like me that just likes to see all of the plugins we use just like flow through you, I'll give you that. Amazing. And with that, I will see you next time for more music, for more tutorials, for more whatever. Whatever it is, it's everything music, 'cause that's me, Omnicorum. I'll see you then.